Okay, so good afternoon and welcome everyone to the NPOwer Mental Health webinar. Today we're really unpacking Mental Health 101 and trauma debriefing, which a lot of us as NPOs, we probably use it every day anyway. If you already do this as part of what your organization does, hopefully today you'll get a bit of a nugget, a refresher, or just a holding space for you to possibly reflect some of these skills on yourself. Especially as NPOs, we're so good at looking after everyone else, but we're not so great at looking after ourselves. So I just really welcome everyone today on behalf of SADAG and on behalf of Shikalulu. We are so encouraged to have so many people here, and I hope that you find it useful and beneficial. Just as a reminder, this afternoon, we will be sharing all of the services around the NPOwer program. Remember, it's free mental health services for you as NPOs, your team, your staff, and we'll share more details towards the end as well. So you're welcome to screenshot this, save it, but we'll also share it. You never know when you need it. For today's session, it's going to be interactive. We're all learning. So you're welcome to post in the chat box comments or suggestions or questions. Again, if your network is strong, you're welcome to keep your cameras on. If you're going through load shedding, you're welcome to switch them off, and please just mute your mics as well. Today, we're really just looking to unpack Mental Health 101. It's through our webinar series from engaging with NPOs after the last 5-6 months and really finding out where are the gaps and how we can provide more support. So today we're really just going to unpack and do an introduction into mental health and mental illness, as well as trauma debriefing skills, especially for NPOs and especially in our new normal where everything is online and connected and digital. I know a lot of organizations are still also working remotely, as are we as SADAG, and having to connect is so much more intentional. So one of the things I just wanted to frame today is that mental illness and mental health, one of the first steps to really tackling the stigma around mental health in South Africa, and especially amongst NPOs who are so good at looking after other people and not themselves, is to really just describe what it is and what it isn't. So mental illness is something that affects the way that we think, we behave, we feel, we react. And whereas mental health is something that everyone has access to and everyone is able to prioritize, it's your general state of mind and well-being, and something that should be looked after. And now more than ever, I think coming up to the whole 1 year since lockdown and the impact that it's had on so many of us, and I know that a lot of NGOs and community organizations have been working harder and longer, and that can be incredibly difficult for so many people over such a long period of time. So without further ado, I'd really love to just welcome our speaker this afternoon. Let me just make sure, again, please mute. Thank you. This afternoon, we've got clinical psychologist and SADAG board member Zamo Mbele, who's going to be giving us an introduction and really sharing some really practical, compassionate skills around trauma debriefing that as NPOs, community organizations, team leaders, we're able to use and adapt. And we're also opening this up as a Q&A. So please post in the chat box. We will be coming to questions as well. We are sharing together. So Zamo, thank you so much for your time and for joining us. I'm just going to spotlight you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Cassie. And I want to begin by thanking you for putting this together and let our audience know that this is a lot of work, and it always gives me pleasure to say that for every hour conversation that we have, Cassie and the team, which includes Petri and Venetia, who I saw are in attendance today, thank you to the two of you, all put in approximately 3 to 5 hours of preparation. So I really appreciate the amount of work that you do. I also want to thank everybody who's present, all 109 of you. especially at this time with the fatigue and with the load shedding. Thank you. What I wanted to do today is really, as Cassie says, is to really kind of have a Q&A. I'm going to say some things, but I want to encourage you to engage with me because we are all at different places in this conversation. And I want to, as far as possible, meet as many people as possible where they are. Unfortunately, I do have a limitation of time, so I'm going to speak quite quickly so that I can leave a lot of time at the end. And I'll have to leave around 22, between 12:30 and 22. So thank you also for organizing the schedule so that I can speak in this way. My work is mostly in the public healthcare system. I work in a hospital, a specialized psychiatric hospital. I also work with a lot of NGOs because I do believe that in order to have a functioning public healthcare system, we also need functioning non-profit organization and non-government organization. These are key organs to a functional state. And so we need to capacitate them as much as possible. So thank you all, not just for the work that you do, but for being able to be here today. I really like your slide, Cassie, when you start to introduce the distinction between mental health and mental illness. And I think it's so articulate. I wanted to add to that, which is something that I was thinking about as you're speaking, that I guess put differently, mental illness and the treatment of mental illness, which is a lot of the work that I do, is actually helping a person get better. And therefore it recognizes when things have gone wrong. And I'll speak a little bit to that, helping a person get better. Whereas mental health is actually helping a person be better. And that speaks to the fact that things are okay, though they could in fact be better. And I think that we need to really drive the conversation, helping people in the society and the community get better, though also helping people in the society and the community be better in different ways. Oftentimes what we see in terms of getting better is that people are oftentimes needing to get better from either mood difficulties. So those are depressions and bipolars. They also sometimes need to get better from psychotic difficulties. And that's a loss of touch of reality, where a person may have delusions, which are thoughts, which are not in reality and not true necessarily. And also part of a psychosis is also having symptoms of hallucinations. So hearing and seeing things that are not there. We also have this third one, which is helping a person get better from anxiety difficulties. And I'm going to speak a little bit more to that. Most of the times we see general anxiety difficulties where a person is feeling anxious. Another word for it oftentimes that people use is incredibly nervous. Though actually people oftentimes describe anxiety with the physical symptoms and sensations. It's a knot in your stomach that never goes away. And in fact, we know that this knot in your stomach actually can almost create a knot in your stomach. It can create ulcers. It can create reflux difficulties, and so on and so forth. Though there are other symptoms that anxiety comes with that we need to help people get better from, which include a difficulty in being able to think when you're at work and during the day, though then a difficulty in being able to sleep at rest when you leave work at the end of the day. So you can get to see how potentially common this must be and might be. So in the parameters of getting better from anxiety, I've kind of spoken to you a little bit about generalized anxiety, though what I did want to focus on for a minute, because I think it's appropriate, is helping people get better from burnout, which is what I know, having done some research ahead of this afternoon's talk, a lot of NGOs and people and personnel in NGOs struggle and suffer from burnout. And we can think of a million reasons, because we're all in NGOs, why that happens. NGOs are oftentimes under-resourced and over-capacitated. NGOs oftentimes need people to double up in roles and positions that oftentimes can actually just be streamlined. NGOs oftentimes work in the margins of society, so it's very unattractive and therefore very difficult work. And I can keep going. A lot of you here will either know somebody who's a colleague or yourself have struggled with burnout. And I wanted to think a little bit about how to get better from burnout. Another thing that I want to think about is how to be better, right? And that's mental health. And the how to be better, I want to start again with burnout, because what we know is that the best treatment of burnout is prophylactic. The best treatment of burnout is not to get burnt out. One of the best treatments of burnout is to know what to do to look out for when you're getting burnt out. But even before that, to know what to do not to get yourself in a cycle and or space of potentially being burnt out. So that is a really important distinction of how to get better from burnout, which is under the realm of kind of a depression, distress, anxiety, but also how to be better so we can prevent ourselves, our colleagues, from getting into a cycle of burnout as well. So I hope I haven't confused you, and it's been a bit clear that we have a huge responsibility and goal, and there's a lot of information that we could possibly share and discuss. Though I think that it's quite helpful to categorize it, not just in getting better, being better, though getting better from mood disorders, which are your depressions, your bipolars, so a person feeling incredibly low, or having a manic episode, so feeling incredibly happy. They're also getting better from your psychotic disorders, which are people having delusions and hallucinations, and also specifically getting better from anxiety disorders, and the mainstay of them being generalized anxiety, though for the purposes of today, looking a little bit at burnout, and I suppose, think a little bit even about post-traumatic stress. I want to pause at this point and see if there are any questions. You can do this in two ways. You can unmute and kind of ask the question, and you can also ask a question in the chat box. And I've got my chat box open on the side, so you can attend to that. Are there any questions? And while you're preparing your questions and really prepare to unmute, I'll tell you where I'm going to go next. I want to speak a little bit more about burnout, and then I want to speak a little bit more about post-traumatic stress disorder and what it is that you can do to be able to help in that regard. And I'll tell you also actually what it is that we do in order to help as clinical professionals. So does anyone want to unmute and ask a question, or write it in the chat box for now? What are the signs of burnout? That's a great question. So I'll tell you what burnout is, and then I'll tell you what some of the signs are. So really, burnout is a type of exhaustion that has depleted all energies, including reserve energies. And one of the things that people will tell you about burnout is that no amount of sleep or rest, no amount of leave can actually help a person with the burnout. It doesn't help you recover, because you've burnt out all of your fuel that you need on a daily basis, and you've even burnt out your reserve fuels as well. And so it becomes almost impossible to rest. Burnout oftentimes looks like the following three categories: exhaustion, cynicism, and being ineffective. The exhaustion is that a person will describe feeling incredibly worn out, loss of energy, depleted, debilitated, and as I said, a fatigue which does not resolve over a weekend or with leave. The cynicism is really the type of feeling so negative about things, feeling almost even irritable and sometimes aggressive and hostile. The person oftentimes gives up on the ideal of what it is that they're doing, and also the ideal of oftentimes even life. They become incredibly withdrawn, and they oftentimes depersonalize, and they isolate, and they step back. This does impact a person's capacity to work and be in the world, because they do become ineffective. And you can then see why it's important to speak to organizations about this. We know that burnout inefficiencies comes with a reduction of productivity or capability, low morale, and an inability to cope. And a person oftentimes reports feeling kind of a personal or professional inadequacy. So burnout is kind of many things, though if for today we can imagine it as exhaustion, cynicism, and being ineffective. And we can then see how burnout affects the person and the organization. And that's why it's incredibly important to attend to burnout. One additional note about burnout is that burnout oftentimes occurs when there is no stop and no difference and a repetition which does not allow for a replenishing. So what do I mean by that is that we know that burnout oftentimes happens when a person is doing one thing again and again and again without either a break to rest and recuperate and also a break to recreate. And at different talks, you'll hear me speaking a lot about those two R's, because those two R's, rest and recreate, can stop the cycle of the ongoing work which depletes you so that you can rest, right? You can pause and rest from what it is that you're doing. But it's also incredibly important to stop that cycle so that you can recreate. Because as I often say, recreation gives you the energy to continue to work. And it may not be the case for everybody, though I oftentimes feel like Friday might be a difficult day to work. Though in the anticipation of the recreation of Saturday, I can push through Friday, right? And Monday might be a difficult day to go to work, though because of the rest of Sunday, I actually can get into it. So you get to see the incredible importance of those two R's in breaking the cycle of burnout so that you do not in fact need to get into, you do not in fact need to get burnt out yourself. There is a hand raised. Oli, so if you can unmute and you can ask a question while I also attend to the chat box.
Yeah, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Zamo, for breaking it down to us. My other question would be possible sometimes if we are continuously fatigued and we have taken the rest, as you mentioned, sometimes even leave that doesn't actually eradicate the effects of fatigue. Probably the mind also needs to be part of the exercise of rest. How can we then have the mind as well? Because sometimes you are away from the physical working, however, your mind has not detached from that physical work. How then the mind can be exercised to be in sync with the physical rest?
Thanks, Clarissa. And I mean, that's a brilliant question, and we could have a webinar alone on your question. Really, really, we could. So you'll forgive me if my answers are not sufficient. I'm going to answer that specifically in relation to burnout and the two R's that I've spoken about. They'll also answer that in saying it might actually show that there's something else that's wrong. In fact, I have a third answer, which I'll start with, which is related to Cassie's questions around how to manage and how to help your staff stop. So the third answer, which is what I'm starting with, is that what we know from research, and really, really repeated research and in different countries, is that there can be an appetite to keep working because there will always be work. There will always be work. All of our NGOs are doing work that is not being done, though needs to be done. And however, what research has shown is that NGOs and personnel in NGOs who are able to appreciate their limitations and capacity work longer and more effectively. Now that was an incredibly important conclusion to reach, because really what it told us all as people in NGOs is that unless you know that you cannot take on more work and that you should stop working, you might be effective and around for up to a third of the time that you could if you were able to say no or not right now. So now my answer becomes a little bit philosophical and maybe kind of in a governance position of saying one of the poisons to a lot of NGOs is that in fact they become a victim of their own success. They work too hard, too long, and then they can no longer work. And an NGO which could have been around for 30 years or 90 years then dies within 10 years or 33 years. And this is research. So you get to see that it could have been more effective if it was a lot more compassionate to itself. Research also showed that NGOs who struggle to say no or not right now and be compassionate to themselves actually run the risk of shifting from being very kind organizations to actually being very sadistic or hostile organizations. And sometimes that hostility gets turned inwards and people in the NGO start feeling disgruntled and want to leave, and then there's high turnover and so on and so forth, and nobody wants to be part of that type of NGO. And corruption, by the way, was shown to be one of the symptoms of this, because people feel like it's unfair that they're working so hard and there's no remuneration. Or they become sadistic to others. So good places, good spaces, and we all know these stories, which start off in a really good way, start to be very horrible and hard and malicious to people that they're helping. So I hope you can hear that my first answer, even though I'm being very quick about it, is such an important one around the governance of NGOs, the ability to know your limitation so that actually you can do more. And the more is not right now necessarily, it's for much longer. And one of the tips that was given, or that is given to NGOs, is in knowing your limitations, you must also partner up, which is why this is such a great initiative. Because it may be possible for you to say, we cannot help you right now, though we do have a sister organization that might be able to step in, which is such a nice strategy, not just for networking, but for the preservation of self and for the exercising of that kindness and compassion, not just to the people that you're helping and serving, but also to yourself as an organization. The second answer, which is also incredibly difficult, is that how do you allow the brain to rest? I think that I also oftentimes speak about symmetrical deliberateness. And what do I mean by that is that equivalence. So if you're doing hard work and it's taking a lot of effort and energy, you have to put in the same amount of energy. It has to be exactly the same in order to rest and recreate. And that means you have to be very, very deliberate in being able to do those two things. And what resting is doing nothing. And initially, for everybody on this call, because you're already on a webinar on a Thursday between 1 and 2, I can tell that every single person here struggles to do nothing. But actually, in order to keep doing what you're doing, there are times where you have to be mechanical, set out periods, whether it's a day or a week or an afternoon, with nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do, and tolerating the nothingness that comes with that period, the absolute rest. And also being incredibly deliberate in setting out time for recreating, doing something, doing things. And what recreating is doing things that bring joy and bring pleasure. And that's where you see where the fuel comes in, right? That actually engage even your neural pathways in the exact opposite of what you've been doing at work. Actually bringing laughter or bringing delight or bringing happiness is recreating. And that is seeing family, it's seeing friends, it's doing an activity. So resting is being deliberate about doing nothing, and recreating is being deliberate about doing something. And a combination of those two, we know, can really help the brain, the mind, also recuperate. Now, the third thing that I was going to say is, if those two things do not help, oftentimes then we know that a person might be struggling with anxiety. Because what anxiety does is that it consumes you when you're awake and it consumes you when you're asleep. So the consumption when you're awake oftentimes looks like a busyness because actually you're trying to push something out of your heart and mind. But when you are no longer in control of your heart and mind, i.e. when you're trying to sleep or rest, then all of that, what you're trying to push out, starts to come back in. And so actually the inability to rest and recreate can itself be a symptom. It can tell you that you also potentially have an anxiety difficulty that you need to attend to. Okay. If there's no other question, I want to kind of, and it's going to feel a little bit disjointed, to really move to speak to you about trauma, because a lot of you must be dealing with trauma. And I like to speak about trauma a lot, because I think that there are two types of traumas. And in South Africa, we see both of them in abundance. The first type of trauma is when there is something that has gone wrong and has put a threat into our psychologies. So it's put a threat into our lives or our livelihoods, right? And that's something that has gone wrong, can be all the way from a hijacking to a home invasion, though also hearing about those things or witnessing those things, witnessing an accident, witnessing some act of violence. And we know in South Africa, we have that a lot. That trauma is incredibly difficult. However, it feels a little bit easier to catch than this second trauma, which a lot of us are dealing with, which is the trauma that is not in an event, but the trauma that is ongoing. So the trauma that is ongoing, for example, is the trauma of COVID. It is traumatic to be in this period. It's traumatic because death is around the corner and yet you cannot see it. It's traumatic because our lives have changed to the extent that we have no certainty, and human beings like certainty in order to be in the world. It's traumatic because we've lost people. It's traumatic because we feared that we're going to lose people. And this trauma is the trauma that is much more difficult because it cannot easily be seen. The second, much more difficult trauma is a trauma of vicarious traumatization that a lot of people experience, especially in NGOs. So what we know about vicarious trauma is that because you do not imagine that you're going through it, and in fact, you expand your empathy to the other person, you're giving the other person empathy, it's very difficult to appreciate that just listening to a story and imagining it and putting yourselves in another person's shoes or even helping them can make you feel, it can be as if you went through it. And so vicarious trauma, we know, oftentimes goes untreated and is a huge character of people and persons working in NGO and NPO settings. So what do we do with trauma? There are very many different ways to treat trauma, though oftentimes the mainstay of it are the following two things. The first one is getting a professional. So getting somebody in who specializes in dealing with trauma to be able to assist the individual. And these professionals include our doctors, so our GPs and psychiatrists. It includes our psychologists who will help with psychotherapy and debriefing. It also includes our counselors who will help with containment, contact and containment in many ways. So what you want to do, and I'll tell you in fact actually what then your colleagues in psychiatry and in psychology will do. Your colleagues in psychiatry will prescribe medication, and that medication will help with the symptoms of the trauma, which oftentimes include a high degree of anxiety and an inability to sleep. Right. And that really helps the person deal then with the thoughts that that come after trauma and enables them to keep going. Your colleagues in psychology will try and help a person create a sense of safety, re-identify with a trust in the world, regain their independence, regain their power, assist with their self-esteem, and an ability to get back into the intimacy of whatever it was that they had before, and help them with their worldview. Oftentimes, psychologists do this with different types of methods, whether it's a pure CBT approach or imagotherapy or a psychotherapy, which includes speaking about the trauma in order to almost remove its sting, to put it in a place that is not so intrusive anymore. Maybe I should have also just said, I'm going to pause and give you some of the four main kind of symptoms or clusters of trauma, which include intrusion. So the thought comes into your mind even when you are trying to do something else or trying to push it out. It includes an avoidance of the stimuli. a consistent avoidance of going to the place or attending to something where the trauma happened. You can see how this can be incredibly difficult if you are getting vicarious trauma at work, or if the trauma was in your home. It includes the third one, which is a negative alteration of cognitions and mood. So a person is then unable to think as clearly, to focus and concentrate and cope. And oftentimes their mood dips and they go into a depression. And the fourth and quite an important one is what we refer to as an alteration in arousal and activity. And that means you have more adrenaline and cortisol in your system more often than you have it more often than not, and it's your baseline now. And we can understand why that would be, right? Because your psychology is saying this is not safe, and you need to attend to the world as much as possible. Let me say two last things about trauma, and then I want to leave a bit of time. One of them is that I used to describe trauma as a document which has no filing cabinet. So we are not supposed to experience traumas in our lives. And our brain is a really great machine because it has filing cabinets for everything. You know, good experiences with family, there's a filing cabinet for that. Work experiences or needs or shopping, all of that. Because there's no filing cabinet for trauma, which is also a good thing, by the way. When we have a trauma, this document circulates back and forth, trying to find its place. And that's why it's almost impossible to be able to get rid of the images, the flashbacks, the thinking about it when you're asleep and when you're awake. And we need to help the brain, unfortunately, create a filing cabinet so that it's stored in there to help us for the future. So there needs to be a filing cabinet that says, actually, this might happen. How do you create a sense of safety? And however, to also help the brain so that it's not circulating and working so hard to try find its place in space. The last point I want to mention around trauma is then what do you do? I think the most important thing, and it's very difficult to articulate, is to try and create a sense of safety for the person. So one of the things that we know about first aid trauma response is a sense of safety, a true safety, a sense of safety is so important. You need to make certain that an individual is out of the situation or away from the stimuli that has caused them the trauma or is likely to be repeated before you can attend to the psychology. So before anybody can come and see me or any of my colleagues, I need to know that the person is in a safe space and in a safe place. Because firstly, it is no good to work with trauma if a person is not in a safe space. And in fact, you can do more harm when trying to work with it before that is done. The second thing is related to a book a colleague of mine is actually publishing quite soon. I'm just thinking, Cassie, maybe I'll send it to you, and then you can put it on the book. It's Judith Answer and another colleague, and they publish, I think the title is something like Tea and Sympathy or Beyond Tea and Sympathy. And one of the things that they speak about there is that actually in the face of acute distress, actually oftentimes a person needs tea and sympathy. They don't need the clever psychology. They just need their basic needs met. Warm water, a safe space, right? Something that is going to calm them down and deactivate all of the sympathetics, the para and the central nervous systems, right? And they need to hear the voice of somebody saying, it's okay, actually you're fine now, again and again and again and again, and maybe a hand on the back, somebody reaching out and giving you tissues. Those are the two things that I think that I wanted to say this afternoon that you can do in the face of trauma. Helping the person be removed from a very unsafe environment and getting them as far away from the stimuli. And the second one, offering them tea and sympathy before you can get them into any other sort of treatment. And I'll end with just, the brilliance of my colleagues it is like when Cassie gave me a call a couple of weeks ago and said, we have somebody who's sitting in the casualty of Charlotte who has had severe trauma, and we just need to get them into a safe space. And that's all you need to do at that point. No amount of medication, not even the best psychotherapist will be able to assist that person. They actually need to be in an environment which is going to be safe and which is going to offer them some tea and sympathy. So with approximately 2 minutes left, and I'm so terribly sorry to not be here for a long enough time, Cassie, you guide me how to use this last 2 minutes.
I mean, how much pressure are you giving me? I've written down so many notes, and this was so useful. And I think maybe 2 seconds, and I know we've got some questions which we'll still continue with even if you're leaving. So please don't go, because we're going through some other stuff. Is if you're engaging, I think what are the key things as a leader, as a team or a colleague, when you're doing an individual group debriefing, what are the kinds of things that you can be saying to kind of foster that safe space or to kind of do that debriefing? What would be your tools?
Great, cool. So I want to answer this maybe in saying the following 2 things. One of them is when we do, okay, let me just, yeah, I'll say it anyway. I want to reassure everybody that my Cassie and my colleagues Petria and Venetia are here. They've heard me speak a million times, and they will know how I would have answered that. So trust me to ask them a lot of these questions, in addition to the fact that they themselves see a lot of work, a lot of, they do a lot of work on a day-to-day basis. So they have equal expertise that will be carried on after this. One of the things, Cassie, that you and I will know when we speak about leadership and when we speak to leadership, Cassie and I occasionally, for example, go into management and we speak there, is we speak about compassionate leadership. And a lot of people kind of then ask me, what is that? And I often say that it's the type of leadership that appreciates that when things get hard, the leadership softens. It's the type of way of working that knows that the best response to a hard situation and circumstance is actually the exact opposite, is a soft hand, it's a soft approach, and meeting the person with a softness in order to account for that hardness. And compassionate leadership is allowing for enough allowance for a person, or giving enough allowance. It's knowing that it is no good to be punitive or to be overly strict to an individual who's struggling. Not only are you going to worsen their symptoms, though it's also oftentimes going to worsen the situation. The next one is to know what to look for. So the difficulty in management and leadership positions is, in fact, you do have to equip yourself in knowing the basics of what anxiety might look like, what grief and bereavement might look like, and what depression might look like. Because you might be the leader, so you might be the manager or supervisor who says, actually, I've been noticing that your work is, the detail in your work is not as good as it used to be, and you're showing up late. I wonder if you're struggling with something, and you'll be so surprised how individuals really respond to being helped to know about these symptoms. So the second one is to really inform yourself. I think the third one is to know that, is to have enough patience to know that dialogue needs to be had and held in conversation. So it might be again and again and again. So that conversation of again and again is that knowing that we're not just going to speak about trauma or depression when we have an event at work. So actually, once a month, also you can link up to SEDIC because we have a great calendar. Once a month, every year, we're going to have the conversation about teen suicide. Once a month, every year, we're going to have a conversation about depression. Once a month, so that's an again and again conversation. There's also an again and again patient conversation when you have to help somebody. It's initiating it. I think something has gone wrong. It's staying with it. How can I help you? This is what I think. And then it's following up to it. And that's saying, I know that we had the conversation last week, a month ago. Where are you at? Have you been able to follow up? How are you doing? And both the ongoing conversation that says we are not going to speak about something when something has gone wrong, we're going to insert it into our calendars. They're also actually being able to really in the nitty-gritty of recognizing if a colleague has a difficulty and trying to say, how are you going to get help, helping them get help and following up with whether they've gotten that help. I hope that's helpful.
It is so helpful, Zamo, and I know that we're over time and you have to run, but I mean, all of these things are just huge light bulb moments, and I can see from the comments as well, it's just so helpful to frame it, and especially for NPOs, because it's a very different platform and different in working environments. So I thank you for your huge nuggets of wisdom and light bulb moments that we've had today. And we'll definitely have more of it, but I know that I'm very respectful of your time and everything. And just from me to you, just thank you so much for your expertise and your compassion, and just great reminders that during a lunchtime that we can take on and use going forward. So thank you very, very much, Samuel.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Petri. Thank you, Venetia. And thank you to everybody. I really appreciate your comments and your presence alone. And I hope to see you all very soon. And everybody have a good day. Cheers.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Bye-bye. Okay, so it's not over. I think what a great way to frame some of the practical tips and tools. And before going forward now, I really just want to open up to you, because this is a learning experience for all of us. And I think what doesn't happen enough amongst NPOs, and it doesn't have to be NPOs from the same sector, it could be NPOs from all kinds, because we can learn. I'd love to learn and have you share with us. All of us have been working remotely in strange situations. Our teams are fragmented. How have you been able to connect or to debrief with your teams during this time, or within your organizations? If you can post them in the chat box, or if you'd like to share some of your creative ideas, and maybe it could give another organization an idea for them to try. I'd love to kind of open up that platform before we go through the rest. Is there anyone who wants to be brave enough to share for 60 seconds, or would you prefer to post it in the chat box? Okay, I think everyone is thinking and typing really, really hard. What I just wanted to just also cover from what Zamo has really just set up, and again, a lot of this we know and we use, like was mentioned in the chat box, we use this for our beneficiaries all the time, but we're not so good at using it internally. And again, in the NPO space where everything is quicker, faster, on the go, we don't have the luxury for time. These are such important reminders that we practice what we preach. And I know from my personal experience with working with our team, and working remotely, there'll be situations where we're having, death by Zoom meetings where this is how we're all connecting on a weekly basis. And sometimes the day that we're connecting is just everything is going wrong, and everyone is just stressed and dealing with deadlines, and they're tired. And we've often gone on meetings and we also put our cameras on, and you can just see someone's there, but the lights are not on. And, we will have a huge agenda and all these priorities and deadlines to go through. And in that meeting you're kind of having to resign to the fact, like, you're not going to be able to have a productive meeting. We actually just need to connect, and we actually just need to debrief, and we actually just need to vent, and creating that safe space. So I've had many meetings where we go in with this huge agenda, and you start the meeting and you can instantly see the vibe is different. And the meeting, we just call it off and we say, okay, we're not going to do the agenda. Let's just chat. What's been going on? What are you stressed about? How are you feeling? And often this can be hard in an open space for people to open up and to talk. So we find different ways of prompting, whether it be rate out of 1 to 10, or describe your day using a weather forecast. It's finding different ways to prompt and reminding ourselves in that moment. Oh, hello. That basic counseling skills. So reflecting, paraphrasing, and as NPOs, we're so quick on, like, we're wanting answers and problem solving, and tell me what the problem is, let me give a solution. So we're very much yes, no type of questions. But working within our teams is having those open-ended. Okay, what happened then? How? What were you feeling? What were you thinking at that time? Share with me. And I think holding space. And sometimes we think that holding space could actually be detrimental, that we don't have time to do it. It could be costing us, but actually holding space is incredibly important to fill up the cups of our team so that they can continue doing what they're doing. You are going to get all of these slides to go through, and I'm sure a lot of us on this the meeting now could definitely add to this. And one of the things I also just wanted to add is debriefing and connecting and compassionate connection doesn't need to happen in a formal way. It doesn't have to be around a boardroom table. It doesn't have to be an intentional meeting request. It could be informal and casual. Making coffee. We often have our biggest powwows and debriefings while we're all hunched into NPO, hashtag NGO problems, the smallest kitchen, and everyone's reaching out over each other to make coffee, or having a coffee date on Zoom. Finding ways that we can connect in different ways, having lunch together and sharing a meal. There's something very therapeutic and cathartic about that. This is something we also suggest to our parents when we're encouraging them to talk to their teens about depression or suicide. Do it while driving, so that you don't have to have eye contact. So it's less defensive, it's less intrusive, but you can often have some of your most meaningful conversations while driving from place to place. Walking around the office and joining in and chatting around the photocopier. It's finding different spaces to do that. In an online world, and this is where I can't wait to look at the chat box, how have you been able to create those kind of casual debriefings online? I'm sure all of you have a million WhatsApp groups, as do we. And we have different teams WhatsApp groups, and we connect every day to, I think, inspire, motivate, share. We often do it via Zoom meetings. I know that there are a lot of other organizations that do it through things like Slack, or House Party. What do you use? How do you connect? For those that are having to do, if there's been a specific incident or traumatic event and you're having to put together now a debriefing, a proper trauma debriefing, this is something as a leader that you could be following just to help prompt a conversation. What I can also say is that sometimes coming together, it might also be awkward and that filled silence, but silence is also good. It could be a holding space. So here are just some of the ideas of what you could do to help focus a debriefing session. Being really clear on the time that is allocated, and going around and giving everyone that opportunity to share, and those that are comfortable. And active listening skills, I think is always key. Individual debriefing, and this could be one-on-one, and in a time of COVID, it could be things that you're doing via voice notes or video call, or connecting, or even just messaging. Creating a space to decongest. And it's because we're also working under huge workloads, but changing scenery. So we'll often say to our team, let me just quickly mute, go outside, go have your coffee, go have your lunch outside, take a photo, share with us, so that we, even though we're all separate and distant, we can actually kind of connect in a strange way. And this is where we can also use our technology, and those kinds of ideas. Being quite purposeful in saying, okay, take this time, go and do this, go and do that. Asking prompting questions. And what we can do is we'll actually share, and if you follow us on social media with NPOwer, we will share some of those prompting questions that you can use for your own mental well-being and mental health, so that we could all be better. You can also share that with your team and see if they then want to share any of their feedback. This will be part of the pack. And as a leader and a colleague, when should you be concerned? What is normal trauma? What is normal anxiety and stress in the NPO space from the kinds of stuff that we're dealing with? And when should you be concerned? And often it's really difficult to gauge this. And this is a really great measure with someone who possibly is in green versus when you should be really concerned and someone is in red. And these are really great things that you can also share with your team. Again, empowering them so that if there was an opportunity for them to connect with their team or their colleagues or their members, they could use that. Simple prompt questions, and again, please add to this. Just checking in, and often we'll do that individually. How are you really doing? You know, how are you doing today? You could be asking questions if you're wanting to debrief. How did you feel then versus now? A 1 to 10 scale, and it's always great to use a rating scale. Do you remember what you were thinking at the time? Do you remember the moment? These are just simple prompt questions that you could do. And I think Zamo packaged this so nicely. In a stressful moment, what to do. And sometimes the T in sympathy, I'll find out all the details, and maybe we can get some books sponsored and donated to us NPOs, and maybe even just doing a webinar just on that, because I love the idea and the concept. How do we connect in a social distancing world? How do we say, I'm here and you're not alone, and I'm sorry, and it's going to be okay, I'm here. There's some really great grounding techniques that we're going to share with you, breathing and calming techniques. We have videos on the NPOwer website with really simple breathing techniques. And I cannot stress them enough how really, really helpful and important they are. Teaching your team, but also practicing what you're preaching, doing it with your team. So the start of your next meeting, do breathing exercise together. They learn through your leadership. And if you're modeling it, they will then do it and also test it out. I always want to end off with this, is that you can't pour from an empty cup. Finding things that fill up your cup, finding ways to fill other people's cups so that they can continue filling up other people. Think of it as a big champagne tower, is that you're just having to look at how can you make sure that there's a constant supply. It's really important, and it's a reminder that we have to add ourselves to our to-do list. When we're looking and caring for everyone else, we also deserve to be on that list. Also, as a self-preservation, if something happens to you, if you burn out or if you get sick, you can't continue what you're doing. You can't continue helping and guiding your teams and working on the projects that you're doing if you're not there. So it actually should be part of your role and responsibility is to look after yourself, because you are your most important asset. And sometimes, trust me, we need daily reminders. And really, it's an intentional effort and a buddy system to check in and to say, hey, we need to do this. Putting on your own oxygen mask and being okay with that and allowing yourself that. Here are just some simple tips and tricks to remind us, and Google has tons, Pinterest has so many ways of how to do some self-care and to test it out and doing it together. One of the things we did in December is that we put in a bunch of different holiday challenges of things that we were going to do, and you'd have to give feedback. And some of us would have to drink X amount of water or have a digital detox. And you'd have a buddy system so that you could check in with someone and say, how are you doing with your challenge? What worked? And that was also just a really nice way to connect and force ourselves to do some self-care. Here are just some more ideas. Simple, you can share them via WhatsApp. If someone just uses and practices one of these things, it's already made a huge difference. I just wanted to go to the chat box. I see a question here. Please, can you go back to the group debriefing slide? Yes, sure. Thank you. I'm so glad that someone can use it. I'm going to go back. Group debriefing slide. This one. You're welcome to take a snapshot. We will also share the presentation with you, so you'd be able to have all of that information as well. I'm going to leave that there for a while. Okay. Sorry, I think I was a bit fast. Okay, everyone can take a photo. Okay. Other questions? Yeah. Age exercise. Yeah, absolutely.
Cassie?
I feel you.
Hey, Cassie.
Yes, hi.
Hi, it's Zilla Young from Lansing. Just on the exercise, I'm an avid exercise person. And one thing that people are under the misinterpretation is that exercise means you've got to join the gym, you've got to have the latest trainers, you've got to have the best, you've got to do etc., etc. Actually, exercise is just being active for at least 10 minutes, if possible, once a day. So what is being active? Everybody's got steps in their home, be it the flight of steps up to your house or within your house or between landings in your house. Step up, step down, 15 minutes a day. Or stand up, sit down on your chair and do like standing squats. 10 standing squats a day, step up and down the steps at home. And collectively, over a week, you've done 70 minutes of exercise, which is more than most people do over a month. So that is what people need to understand, that it's actually just about being active. It's not exercise in the formal sense of the word. And those 10 minutes will eventually get you being 15, 20, because you'll feel so great with the endorphins that are released that it will become your release. Instead of sitting down having a glass of wine before supper, you're stepping and you'll stand up and sit down squats. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zilla. And I think, again, yes, I'm a huge advocate. Saying exercise, it's just about getting active, right, and moving. And I think one of the things I've also realized that during COVID and lockdown is that we're sitting in a one space. You know, when you used to travel to the offices, you're moving from your car and your parking lot and you're moving around so much more. And now you're kind of honed in and staying for long periods of time. So forcing ourselves to be active. My team are probably going to kill me, but I often get them to do, we've done stretch exercises at the beginning of meetings, and they can do for 5 minutes. And I think it's also important to do it with them. So it's not just do this, but I'm also doing it and they're really helpful. One of the things we did for our teams also is we ran weekly online, which is possible, yoga sessions for beginners. We're not that flexible. And our counselors were able to connect and just do something different and get moving. So they are definitely really creative ideas. And there's so many amazing people who are willing to help. I think as an NPO, whenever we hear of a support service, we always think, oh, how much is it going to cost? We have no money, just never mind. But actually reaching out and saying, can you just do one half-an-hour session? It can make a huge difference. So thank you for that, Bella. I really, really love it. One of the things I just wanted to do, and Pietri, if you can just help me, I know she's my tech support. I'd really love your feedback from today and the questions in your box. I mean, there's so much that we need to do. I really want to share an evaluation link with you. It takes less than 3 minutes, but I'm wanting to get your insights. What other topics do you want us to do? I'm sure everyone is saying, please bring Zamil back for the next session. I will, I promise. I've learned so much just from that, and I have the privilege of hearing him talk all the time. But I want to hear your other ideas. What other topics do you want us to do? I also want to understand what your teams are dealing with, what kinds of trauma. And there's also an option in the evaluation link to please let us know if you want us to reach out and offer trauma debriefing sessions for your team. And we can do it online or remotely as well. So we'll be posting that link in the chat box now, and we'll send it to you via email as well so that you can just fill it in. I'd really, really appreciate your feedback. But something interesting that has popped up in a few comments just before we end, I told you I would be over. I wanted to just quickly find out, I so enjoy sharing with other organizations who understand the NPO platform. I'm sure some of you before, sharing what you do and the kind of the nature of the work, it's hard to explain to other people who are not in the sector or in the industry. They don't quite understand when we say we're working hard or we're burnt out, but we don't have the luxury to step back. I would actually love an opportunity to possibly even look at running an NPO support group for NPOs to share, to connect, and to network ideas. I'm already part of a patient user network, and I have some amazing connections and networks with other organizations that are not in the mental health space, but I so value that space to connect with someone. So I'm going to launch a poll because we're getting that fancy now. I'd really love you to take 2 seconds and tell me if you would be interested in joining an online support group. I know that we don't have time for long meetings. It would probably be once a month online, but that we could always work out the details. Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm loving all the feedback here. This is really interesting. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining. Thank you for giving up your time. I know it's really hard. An hour is a long time in the NPO space. It's like dog years. So I really appreciate it. I hope you were able to take one bit of information that you can use and share with your teams, for yourself, and please, definitely for yourself. We will be sharing the link and the handouts, and you are welcome to share that with any other organizations, your colleagues, your teams. We want you to share and share and share. Please don't forget, we do have the NPOwer website and the NPOwer services all available. I'm going to put that slide up on our screen so that we can all access it. Okay, let me just get it up, and that you can then screenshot it and share with anyone who would need it. You can see all the other information. Here are all of our details. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We share daily articles and tips and tricks that you can share with your teams and hopefully adopt for yourself. And visit us on our website, where you can also reach out and set up a session, refer a colleague, and even organize a online connect session. Please know that there is support available for you. There's a 24-hour helpline just for NPOs that you are welcome to share with your team, your volunteers, and any of your stakeholders that need support. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I really love the engagement. Please look out for our next session, probably in a month's time. Be safe and look after yourself. And please take some time to reflect of a year of lockdown with your teams and have a great connected conversation. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Have a good afternoon.
This has been so much fun.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. It was nice.
Bye. I love the team efforts and all the people joining together. Ah.
Love it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great afternoon.
Bye. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining.
Bye. Have a great day.
Thank you.